So when we learn these Mishnayot, the first thing that we do always is we go through the Mishnah in its simplest form, and then we'll break it down and then try and understand what it will mean to us in a perhaps in a deeper way, and then we take a step further and ask how not only does this mean something to us, but how we can change because of it. Now, if you remember from last week we discussed the idea of Rabbi Shimon, I think it was Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Shmuel said, he talked about the ideas of not being a person who's a judge, who's removing himself from judgment when he doesn't have to judge. And we talked about this idea, why would someone ever have to judge? Why don't we just play it safe and never judge, right? We talked about that last week. And we talked about the idea that actually that's not realistic. People are judging all the time, instantaneously, and oftentimes are judging people incorrectly because of the amount of time that they're spending. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi continues along the vein of where he left off last week. And now he gives us a second concept, and he says as follows: Al tehi dan yechidi. A person should never judge on alone. She'en dan yechidi ela echad. Now, on the surface level, the Mishnah, as we mentioned already last week, putting you behind the pole. On the surface level, the Mishnah is communicating to us a law as it pertains to judges. But as we expressed last week and previously in other Mishnayot that discuss elements that seem to relate to judges in a bet din, they would not have included it in Pirke Abot if it was something that was limited only to a judge in a bet din. There has to be something, ethics of the fathers is meant to be something that communicates truths to all future generations, wisdom that stands the test of time and applies across the broadest sense of perspective. So clearly it's not only referring to a judge sitting in judgment in a court, but also to the perennial judges, human beings themselves. Now, the Mishnah is talking again in the parlance of its given example, and that is the way one speaks to a judge. The halacha is that there can never really be a bet din officially that is less than 3. A bet din is supposed to be of 3 people. However, the halacha, the raw halacha says that a yachid mumche, a single expert, is also able to rule a case halachically. So as an example, let's say a rabbi is living in a town and he doesn't have 2 other people who are capable, who know halakha, to sit along with him on the bet din. So what does he do in such a case? On certain cases, he has the leeway to be yachid mumche, a single expert, and he's able to judge in that case. Ve'al tomar, and he should not say, kablu da'ati, accept my view. Shehen reshain velo ata. So now the Mishnah is saying, assuming you took our advice in part 1 of the Mishnah and you didn't rule alone, you invited 2 other people to sit with you, but you're the expert, you're the one that we had to tell, don't rule alone, right? You're the one that we had to ask this of you. Ve'al tomar, don't now have 2 other people and say to them, kablu da'ati, accept my understanding. Listen to me, because I'm the one that knows best here. I'm the one with the most training. I'm the one with the most experience. Shehen rishain velo ata. The purpose of adding people to a bet din, at least 3 in the minimum case, the purpose of having those 2 other people is to be able to have that disparity of opinions, to be able to have the multiplicity of perspectives. And when we have multiple perspectives, then the odds are that the truth is going to come out. So if you invited them in, don't then say, well, you have to listen to me because I'm the smartest here, or I have the most experience, or I studied the halakha and I studied the law. Shehen rishain, that is their prerogative. In the case of a bet din, they hear the case, and then each judge rules, my opinion, my opinion, my opinion, and then we follow the majority. So it is up to the majority to be able to then say to the minority and say, we hold like you. We agree with your assessment of the law. So when somebody does that, that's their prerogative. Don't invite them in and then do that. Now, let's take this Mishnah, as we said right when we began, and try and expand it out and see where we go, see how it interprets when we're talking about not just a judge, but also a person who is judging. This idea of al tihi dan yechidi. Why should a person not judge independently? Now, I have to start with asking this question, because before we get the mashal, the nimshal, we have to accurately understand the mashal. What's the difference between a mashal and nimshal? Someone help us out. The mashal is the parable. The nimshal is the lesson that you're learning from it. If the Mishnah here is giving us a story, a lesson, an idea, if we don't understand the mashal, we have no hope of understanding accurately the nimshal, okay? So let's first understand the mashal over here. Why would a person who's allowed to rule in a singular way by himself, why would he have other people on the Beit Din if he's allowed to do so? Why should he? I learned the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, the Gemara says, the Halacha says, right? It teaches me the halachic responsa, the shut igrot Moshe. He rules on this case like this. This is the case. This is the law. Find it in the book. Apply it here. Bob's your uncle, like they say across the pond. Right? That's it. It's all we need. Why do I need anybody else for that? Why do I need to invite another opinion? All I need to know, all I need to have is the scholarship, is the erudition. Yeah.
You talked about, I think maybe earlier, that you cannot only see it from, you need another, like there was something in the Abot teaching of don't just be the only judge, you need another perspective.
So I'm not sure where you're referring to, but there's no question that has come up in Pirke Avot. The question is from whence? From where are you coming? It might be Ezehu Chacham Alomed Mikol Adam.
Yeah.
You're saying that you're allowed to rule the case because you're a wise man. If you're not willing to learn from other people, then you're not a wise man. But is that the case? Is that always the case? Like, I have to make every decision in collaboration? Like, I go out on a date, I have to convene a Beth Din and decide if I should carry on dating this person? Like, I decide to send my children to a school, I need to convene a Beth Din, or am I never allowed to trust myself? So there are many answers to this. Yes, Anna?
I think it's very different. It's a huge responsibility when you're making a ruling for someone else versus small, minor decisions, or major decisions for yourself.
So a major decision for myself is less than a minor decision for someone else?
Of course, at the end of the day, I mean, even if to look at the responsa literature, each and every passage could rule very differently. And at the end of the day, none of us know the truth.
Okay, so I mean, isn't that possible as well, that the same way I might choose this responsa, they might choose another responsa? Why is their choice any better than my choice? And in fact, what if I am objectively more learned than them? Not that I think, not that ego drives me to believe that. They'll admit it. Everyone knows. I spent 50 years studying Talmud from the greatest rabbis, and this guy, he's an armchair scholar. He'll tell you he's done the Daf Yomi a couple of weeks. It's in a case where it's clear. Why would the person who has the most knowledge? Again, what I love to do always is try and take it away from this instance, bring it somewhere else, and then see if our experience bears out when we change genres. God forbid someone has an operation to do. They go to the expert, the cardiologist, a person who's seen this operation 1,000 times. They've operated successfully in every one of those cases. And then you say to them, look, I'd like a second opinion. Let's go bring in my pediatric doctor, the GP, my general practitioner friend. Also this physician's assistant, who just graduated from college. The cardiologist is going to tell you, are you out of your mind? How could you possibly equate my opinion with theirs? Now, let's say they overrule him 2-1. You're going to follow the opinion of this GP and this physician's assistant over the person whose expertise is in this thing. I got a text, actually. I don't know if I shared this with you. I got a question sent to me by a student in school. Did I share this with you? A student in school, and the student asked. They said, what is your opinion, Rabbi? What do you hold if someone is on is not showing brain activity. Did I not share this with you? I think I did, right? Someone doesn't have brain activity. You know what's the case? What's the halacha? If there's no brain activity, can you donate their organs to someone else? So I shared this last week, right? I said I can't answer that question. Here's a response that takes you through the issues where there's lots of different opinions over here. But this is literally a matter of life and death. There is an act of murder if I hesitate too much on behalf of the person who might need the heart. There's an act of murder on behalf of the person who I take the heart from too soon. So to go in either side puts me in an incredibly difficult position, and this is not the area of expertise that I have. So I'm not going to give you an opinion. And they kept pressing for an opinion. Well, what do you think? And I wrote, I don't think. I ask. You have to know when you're in above your head. Now, could you imagine that me and Rabbi Mizrahi went to the leading expert in end-of-life halachic issues, and he's saying, after seeing the case and looking at the responsa, this is the law. And me and Rabbi Mizrahi are like, nope. We outrule him. We're both rabbis. We both have simicha. Yes, but that's not. I didn't spend so many years, so long learning this specific issue, understanding the nuances. You have to understand that that's not a. So when the Mishnah over here says Al Tehi Dan Yechidi, it's telling you that a person who is far wiser still needs to bring two other people in on the bet din. Why? Why does that? Why? Yeah.
So what if it's not just about their knowledge, but just about being human? So every person, even if they are knowledgeable, knows all the dinim, at any interval could have something else affecting them that would allow them to make a decision that's not really what it should be, based on their history, based on their health that day, based on their number of things. People are human. So if you have someone else that's in the same plane, not someone that doesn't know the laws, or that it's not their area of expertise, but someone that's on the same page, same learning, and maybe they would offer another view, unbiased or unfiltered, or, because we're human.
So you're saying that the fact that a person is human means that they might make a mistake, or that they might be having a difficult day, or that they might whatever. So therefore, those two extra opinions kind of keep me on the straight and narrow. That's what you're saying. But that's what she's saying. Can't disagree that that's what she's
I
saying.
think she's saying that the rulings are subjective. That's what she's saying.
Well, let's ask her.
I think that
What are you saying?
I am saying that it's what you're saying. It depends on the day.
Sorry, Anna.
I think it's.
I think we should get a Beth in to decide what she's saying. That way we can all decide together. I think the reason why I assumed that that's what you meant is because you prefaced it by talking about how human beings are biased, they're sometimes weak. So it's clear that that's about, so to speak, this inherent deficiency, even in the greatest human being. So, it's possible. Those two extra eyes, present two extra, possibilities of making sure that things are correct. I'm not disagreeing. I want to bring everything on board first, and then and only once we feel like we have the best understanding of the mashal, then I want to kind of drive it across the bridge and take it to all of us in the nimshal. Yeah.
So again, going back to the other perspective, we had Hillel and the other really.
You need to speak much louder when you have a mask
So
on.
we had Hillel, right? The other Pirke Abot and Shama. So one was Gevura and one was Chesed. One was their different approaches to the true, lesson from how Hashem, whatever they are so learned, but they bring two different. That's what you kept showing us. One would be very Shamash was more hard.
Dean, yes, Gvura.
And the other one gave him more broad, and it's different results based on, I guess, back and forth, whatever. But that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, so you're saying is that.
Gevura essence or Chesed approach, which one?
So you're saying perhaps the second judge, it's not about a mistake, it's about the fact that he's different. He just brings another perspective. It's interesting kind of you saying that, because we're going to come back to that in the Nimshal. And I'll explain in a minute why that's less relevant in the Mashal, but still very relevant in the Nimshal. Yeah.
I think maybe it also refers back to Pirke, where you said that every rabbi needs a teacher, as smart as they are.
Yeah.
They need a teacher. So it's like, well, kind of like what Abot she was saying before, that you get different perspectives from different people, that one person can't see everything.
One person can't see everything. And I don't know if you remember, we learned something very interesting in that Mishnah about the idea of Aseh L'charav. Something that's going to bear impact on this as well. And I'll come back to that later. So that's exactly right. Yes.
I was going to say, it just goes to when you ask your rabbi like a question, it's important to ask a rabbi who knows you. So it's you can go to the expert and get all the kind of rulings of what is and what isn't. But then to go to someone who knows you, like a doctor or a rabbi, to help you kind of decide what is best for you.
So perhaps let me see if I understand what you mean. Sometimes the answer is the answer that it is because of the question that was asked.
Right. So
and therefore, going to a person who is a bigger expert but less accessible, or a bigger expert but doesn't really know you, or a bigger expert but who had less time to hear you out, means that he's an expert ruler on the question that he thinks you're asking. But he might not be accurate in his understanding of the question. Look, here's someone, Ronnie, 2 seconds ago, said a pshat. We're sitting 3 feet away from each other. We had different perspectives of what she said. So never mind if the answer's right. Did we get the question right? Did we understand? How many times am I in groups? Ever have this in a group where someone will say something and the other person responds, you're like, no, they didn't mean that. Happens all the time, right? Yeah, no, that's not what they meant. They meant, and you're reinterpreting what the person meant. So obviously the response then has to change as well. So maybe the reason why you might need an extra judge, even if the judge is not as experienced as you in the law, maybe he's better than you at listening. Maybe the fact that he's not as learned means that he's more connected or closer to the asker and understands what they're asking because he doesn't have that same level of knowledge or piety or kedusha as you. So he's maybe more in the world of the questioner than you are. Fascinating, huh? If you remember now, we'll go back to that Mishnah. There were opinions that said Aseh L'charav doesn't own. Let's say everyone's supposed to have a rabbi. Well, who's the rabbi of the Gadol Ador, of the greatest rabbi in the generation? And we saw brought down in the Rishonim an opinion that says that if you're the wisest rabbi in your city, town, country, generation, get yourself a rabbi who knows less than you, and make that person your rabbi. And we were trying to work out, what does that mean? The point of a rabbi is to learn from someone, to have them guide you. But if I know more than this person, how can they guide me? And we talked about the idea that although he might not provide as high a level of Torah wisdom, perhaps he'll provide for you a different perspective on the issue, which maybe doesn't come from Torah, but comes from another set of eyes, okay? Now, it's interesting what the Mishnah here says. So again, let's wrap up the Mashal, and then we'll go to the Nimshal. And if I forget to come back to what we said earlier, remind me. She'en dan yechidi ela echad. The Mishnah over here throws in something which seems to be very interesting. Don't rule alone. You know why? Because the only one who rules alone, ela echad, is the Holy One, blessed be He. The one about which we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is one. God rules alone. We don't rule alone. Well, interestingly enough, little known fact, something that we actually read about God Himself, who rules alone. The fact that He doesn't rule alone. And in fact, what the Mishnah is teaching us is, there's no one more capable than God. Everything that God would bring in to His courthouse, would seem to be completely redundant. He created them, He gave them whatever knowledge they have, and yet God chooses to include them in the decision-making process. Where do we have that? In Bereshit, when God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. He incorporates the heavenly court. He, so to speak, asks the opinion of the angels. What's the point? Why would he do that? Answers Rashi to teach us that you always must ask others and involve them in the decision-making process. Where God himself, who didn't need, who could gain nothing, there would be nothing that God could gain. And yet he does it. God still, as we know, has a bet din shel ma'ala. If God does it, do you think that you're above it? Now, I learned from here something very interesting in this Mishnah. Because you pointed out the Hillel and Shammai saga. So in the Mashal, actually, Hillel, who does he rule with? Who's on Hillel's bet din? Not Shammai. Not Shammai. Hillel and Bet Hillel. Who's Shammai's courthouse? Shammai and Bet Shammai. So the point here is not about finding necessarily opposing viewpoints, right? And part of the reason why that's a little bit less relevant in the Mashal, but wholly relevant in the Nimshal, is because in a court of law, in the halachic aspect, it's not as relevant, the concept of chesed and gevura. Why? Why? In law. Let's say I'm leading my cow down the street. My cow does damage. I feel very bad for you. You still have to pay. Those are the laws. Baba Kama, page 2, right? Says a person there's 4 avot and nezikin, shen, keren, shen, and regel. Those are 3 elements that are applicable to the damage that someone's money or property does. Your animal, I looked away for 1 second. I was taking my kids to the store, right? All the reasons in the world. We feel very bad for you. You still have to pay. So when it comes to the law, to the halakha, I don't know that necessarily there's an element of gvura and an element of din that one would use in their rulings that would differentiate greatly between the 2 cases. However, as we learned already many times before, the first job of a judge is to seek to not pass judgment. The first thing a judge is supposed to offer the litigants is pshara. Pshara means, what does pshara mean? Compromise. First he's supposed to tell them, why? Why do we need to go to the law? Why do we need to advance this case? Surely, you could give in a bit, and you could give in a bit. Maybe we don't need to bring in the lawyers and drown all that money in legal fees. Maybe we could come to some sort of amicable, right? That's really what the judge's first responsibility is. And in that process, it absolutely makes a difference, the constitution of the judge. In that case, it absolutely makes a difference. Like Ronnie said, if that person personally just had, as I mentioned last week, their father die, and now someone's coming in an inheritance case, you know that the guy's going to have the proclivity leaning that way. So Dan Yechidi means get the other person's perspective before you rule. And Hillel and Shammai were equals. So again, in the Mashal, it maybe doesn't work as well. But in the Nimshal, it absolutely does. Understanding that before a person judges someone, that they bring other people in to the perspective. Now let me ask you a question. What do you do when you can't do that? I'll give you an example. Let's say Jessica's very upset at me. But she wants to figure out what she should do before she judges my actions. So what's she gonna do? She's gonna go sit down with Robin, and she's gonna be like, you don't know what just happened, I'm very angry. We sit in the same office. She's obviously talking about me. Right? One of the rabbis it's clear from the case, right, that it was me that upset her or whatever the case might, right? Whatever the case might be. But she doesn't want to judge. what do you do when you can't bring anyone in, but you don't want to judge alone?
You look at a Sidur, or you look at some kind of a Hebrew book to try and get an idea of what you should do.
So that's called Goral Hagira, but that's very mystical. There's a thing that they used to do. They would fast and they would pray, and then they would take a chumash and randomly open the chumash, and the first thing they would find on the page would be something that would indicate to them what they should do in their current scenario. But you need to be a person of serious substance to, number one, be able to have the fast and the right intentions, to do the teshuvah, and to pray and to know what to say, and also to know how to interpret what it is that you open it to, right? Yeah? You know, sometimes I remember, it's one of the great challenges as a rabbi to keep your mouth shut. You know? I remember being once in a case where this person was telling me how, you know, Hashem had communicated to him because he went up to the Torah and, you know, and he was, you know, trying to, what's it called? He was trying to decide whether or not he should go forward with this prospective match, and what's it called? And he saw this woman's name in the Torah. But the guy didn't know how to spell the girl's name, and it was the word. It wasn't the same word at all. So I felt like I don't know that that's my business to point that out. You know, after he's now married and telling me that what helped him make the decision was this message from Hashem. I'm like, unless Hashem is dyslexic, that's not the sign. He knows how to spell the name, but I didn't feel like that. I should say that. Why? Because we have a teaching that says, Te'arev alav hamekach. What does that mean? If someone comes to you and says, is this a good deal? You should give him your honest opinion. I'm looking at this house, I'm looking at this apartment, I'm looking at this shirt, I'm looking at this car. Is this a good price? You should give them your honest opinion. What happens if they already bought the house, car, suit? Then it says, Te'arev alav hamekach. Make the purchase sweet upon him. I think Chazal were talking about before the concept of Amazon and free returns. If it's a person still in a stage where they're able to return it and undo the fact that they got ripped off, then maybe you still have to tell him your honest opinion. So my first question is, can you return it? Right? No, I just say, sometimes I don't say, I say, can you return it? They're like, no. I said, well, okay, then let me take a look. That's how I hide it. See what I do? Right? That's how I do it. I said, can you return it? Well, let me take a look. And then you take a look, you're like, oh wow, it's so beautiful. Looks like it's very good quality. Maybe her name is spelled with a tet instead of a taf. I don't know, right? So, but again, you keep your mouth shut. You got to keep your mouth shut. Okay? So sometimes a person could look in a book, but I think there's a beautiful element in what you're saying anyway. Even if you're not doing a Goral Hagera, maybe opening up a Chumash and trying to learn about something relevant to this might help give you another perspective. Yeah?
Look at the precedents and all the similar cases that have been decided by different.
Oh, excellent. So that's similar to what I was saying in the second thing. She said maybe look at precedents. That's what I was saying when opening the book, not randomly, but finding other cases where you learn this lesson. I want to give you a trick though, but first I want to hear this, yes?
But also taking it a step further, each and every case would reference how they arrived to, and thus you're not just looking at the answer, but you're looking how it was arrived to, and then you compare.
So sometimes in the responsa, they show their work. Like they tell you how they made the conclusion. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you do have it, sometimes you don't. I want to share with you a much easier solution. And I learned this from the marketing and advertising industry. Last night we had two people who came to our class that were in marketing and advertising. And in the marketing and advertising industry, they do something which first I thought was absolutely crazy. And eventually I started to realize what it meant, and I started to use it extensively in the way that I prepare for classes, in as well in the way that I try and make decisions when it comes to a decision that I have to make on a communal issue or an education issue. And that is that they create customer profiles. Has anyone ever heard of this before? Yes, Jessica, what is a customer profile in marketing?
You create a view of who your target demographic is.
Okay.
And then base your marketing plan on who the actual customer is.
Excellent. So a simple version. Did you guys hear that, or was that mask? Yeah, you heard it or no? Okay. So creating a customer profile is finding who the people are that I'm trying to target, understanding who that person is, and then when I'm going to market to that person, I tailor my marketing to that person. So as an example, let's say I'm making a hoodie, and I decide I want to market it to teenagers. So I'm not going to put, some Latin quote on the back that they're probably not going to know. So what I'll probably do is pick something which is very young, millennial, slash Gen Z, slash, whatever. And I'll find, I'll see a hashtag that's on social media. That's probably something that they would like. If I'm trying to market a hoodie to law students, then maybe a Latin quote, from some original, that might be more appropriate, yeah? So you create customer profiles. But what's interesting is, I don't know if you know this, is that when they create these customer profiles in companies, and it started with the marketing and advertising agency, but they actually taught it to the business world. They don't just say the 18 to 35 demographic. They give the person a name, Sophie. Who is Sophie? She's 19. They make up a school she went to. They make up her socioeconomic background. And they give as much detail as they can to create this actual fake person with as much detail as possible. Sophie. Okay? And then they create Walter, who's 62 years old, nose hairs, okay? Walter likes, lox and cream cheese bagels. He likes to complain every morning about the weather. But they nail these custom profiles to a T. They create an actual person. And then in meetings, they say, well, you know what? This is not gonna work for Walter. This might work really well for Sophie, but Walter's gonna hate this, okay? This is one of the most amazing tricks in the world. So companies use it too. They figure, why do we need to do this only for marketing? We should also do this in product development. Walter doesn't need a hoodie, he needs a nose hair trimmer. Okay? You see what I'm saying? The product development itself could benefit from this too. This secret is something I started using when I start thinking about how I want to present a class. So if in this class I know that there's not going to be a 16-year-old girl, I don't give examples that I think are going to be relative or relating to someone who's still going through a process in high school, because that's not where we are. That's not what's going to help us understand the material. But what I found very interesting is that you can create customer profiles and have them sit on your shoulder. And you can talk something through. If you give it enough flesh and bone, you could talk it through with Sophie. Isn't that brilliant? You don't want to judge Yechidi. You have a teenage daughter. You don't want to judge Yechidi. But you can't talk it over with her. You're not going to call her friends and humiliate her and make her not want to talk to you forevermore. So you create a customer profile of a 16-year-old girl in your daughter's class, of a 13-year-old boy in your son's camp, and you can actually hear what it is that they would say. And somehow, because it's not the person you're fighting against, right? It's not the person you're trying to get to go to bed on time, suddenly their opinion and their position is something you can hear. And I thought, maybe that's a great solution to Al Tihi Dan Yechidi, She'en Dan Yechidi Ela Echad. Only God can judge alone, because God has every perspective. And God understands every person. And God understands every person's circumstance. And God knows their thoughts and their emotions in a way that no human being can ever understand them. And yet he sits with the Bet Din Shel Ma'ala. How much more so should we be cautious in trying to understand someone, even with, having spent the time to hear them out. But until we hear from our customer profile, and by the way, you'll never be able to create enough customer profiles to be able to accurately hear that exact perspective, but at least we've tried, okay? And then the Mishnah continues and says, Ve'al tomar kablu da'ati. And if you brought two more, people in on board, don't say afterwards, now listen to me, shehen risha'in velo ata. It's up to them to say that and not up to you. When you're now going to ask other people's opinions, there's nothing that gets people more annoyed than asking them for their opinion and then doing what you wanted to do anyway. So annoying. Why are you even asking me? Right? So word to the wise. Just because you ask for someone's opinion doesn't mean you have to listen to them. It doesn't mean that. And that's not what the Mishnah here is telling us. It's not telling us that don't ask, and therefore you alone can never ever make a decision. That's ridiculous. I'm supposed to be the final word in the decisions that I make. But like Anna said earlier, if I'm going through this responsa, and I see that the end, the halacha is like so, perhaps I gained nothing from the final answer of the responsa, but I may have gained loads from the discussion itself. So as an example, a parent is deciding how to deal with their child. A person is deciding what the proper approach is in their dating life, in how they're going to proceed in a relationship. They ask someone's opinion, that they value their opinion. It doesn't mean that you have to listen to them, but probably along the way, some of the concerns or the issues that they raised will be something that you really hear. And if you do, even if at the end of the day you need to still discipline the child, today if you go online, they'll tell you that the only thing that children need is love. Rubbish. Sorry. Stupid, ridiculous advice. It's true that all they need is love. But the biggest mistake that they make when they say that is to think that discipline doesn't come from love. Yes, children only need love. Included in love is discipline. Chosech shifto soneh beno, Shlomo HaMelech says. Spare the rod, right? Hate the child. You only let a kid do whatever they want if you actually couldn't care less about him. Now, in the end of the day, I might decide that this new age child counselor, therapist, life coach is wrong about what I need to do with the kid. But they may have raised some incredible points about how my son is feeling. And therefore, I can build into the discipline something that they are saying. And I think that's also true over here. The judge with the greater amount of knowledge might wind up deciding to go with what he thought in the first place. But maybe the perspective of the judge, and sometimes because they know less, allows for the judge to have a keen insight into the mind of the litigant. And although the action doesn't change, the decisions and the judgments we make are absolutely colored by the road we take to get to the final judgment. Can I ask you a question? Yeah? I was reading it on. I don't know if any of you is following this, but recently in Utah, have you guys seen this? I find this hilarious. in the middle of nowhere in Utah, okay, amongst the mountains, a place which is like not accessible by car. This man is flying his helicopter over this, like the mountain area in this abandoned area in Utah. And in middle of nowhere is a 12-foot monolith. A monolith is a tall, rectangular, metal structure in this case. Now, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Space Odyssey, 2001, right? Dun, 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 dun. That's Space Odyssey. That music was written for that movie, okay? So this crazy monolith in the film, and that happens in the film. So in Utah, somebody has gone to great lengths to install this metal tall box. It does nothing. There's nothing in it. And they've dug it into the ground. It was a lot of work, and they probably needed to fly there. And somehow they realized it was there, and people started flocking to this because of the movie reference to see what it was. Mysteriously, it disappears. 2 days later, only yesterday, somewhere in the middle of Europe, another monolith mysteriously appears. So clearly, pranksters are finding this hilarious, and they're feeding into the conspiracy theorists, of people who believe that, in Area 51 are aliens and they're planning on attacking us. By the way, if you take a look, the second monolith actually has like scribbles on it. So it's not the same monolith. But I'm sure that these pranksters thought, what if we etched stuff in and people thought it was a message? I'm laughing, imagining how much the pranksters are laughing, okay? Now, why do I bring this up? Okay? Why do I bring this up? We talked about how the process of judgment is not about the end result, but it's about the lead up. And as I'm reading this article about about this monolith in Utah, it says BLM president says that he thinks that the monolith is illegal. It was placed there against the law. And I'm like,
Cheers.
why do I care what the president of BLM has to say about a monolith? Like, when did Mr. BLM become a spokesperson on all things? Until I realized that the president of the BLM was the president, unfortunately, for him, of the Bureau of Landmarks.
Oh my gosh.
It had nothing to do whatsoever. It's just an unfortunate, for him at this stage in time, an unfortunate crossing of initialed paths. But I still remember how upset I was that BLM was. First of all, that's a jump to judgment, isn't it? Number one. Number two, and this is really where I'm getting at, to criticize BLM as a movement, although in the world it's not okay. Anybody that says anything is immediately canceled, loses their job, hate mail online, destroyed on social media, people calling for their head, death threats, right? It's got to be okay to call out something that's incorrect when people are looting in the name of Black Lives. That's got to be okay, right? But it also has to be done, I think, in a way where it's clear that you're not actually taking the mick out of the pain and the suffering that the marchers are marching for. Is that fair? Yeah? That's a balanced approach to this. So no one is belittling the fact that there are cases where there is police brutality. No one is minimizing that. But you also can't decide to shoot cops in cop cars. You also can't decide that we need to defund the police and not have police, because when the police stood back, as they did during the march, gun rates shot sky high. But if you make a comment like that, you're perceived as enemy number one. The balance of arriving at a decision, but taking a circuitous route to get there, a route that actually shows compassion for the pain that is clearly there and actually is justified, right? That perhaps is what happens when a person is not dan yechidi. When they're bringing in other people, listening to other people's experiences, hearing that, and then not making it as if it's nothing. Only yesterday, 2 days ago, we had a kids class here. And I was talking about how somebody, no one would do something that's that stupid. And a 5-year-old kid raises his hand and says, "Stupid is a bad word. We're not supposed to say stupid." I said, "You're right. I'm sorry, we're not supposed to say stupid." I didn't call someone stupid. I said that the thing they did, but I'm not going to start playing, word games with a 5-year-old. I thought actually what would be better educationally for him is for me to apologize and say that he's correct. So I said, "Stupid is a bad word. You're right. We shouldn't use it. I shouldn't have said it." Then all of a sudden, some other 5-year-old kid pops up and says, "Black people say stupid." I was like,
Wow.
"What? Where? How?" Right? And before I can say anything, a 7-year-old kid sitting on the other side of me leans around and says, "That's racist." Amazing. Now this 5-year-old kid, he sees that he's being told off, probably doesn't know what the word racist is, And I said to him, "Actually, it's probably right. You really shouldn't say that." Right? Because we're saying that, I said there are black people that are nice, and there are black people that aren't nice, and there are white people that are nice, and there are white people that aren't nice. That's not something that is divided based on the color of your skin. And the kid is just like, no idea. Zero idea. Runs up to his father, like trying to understand, like. Now, this 5-year-old kid, where did that come from?
He heard it.
He heard it. He heard it. You think he knows any black people? He doesn't even know any black people. Why? Where is this value judgment coming from? He heard it. He heard it at home. He heard it in school. He heard it. That's what he doesn't know what he's talking about. And on some level as well, the 7-year-old kid who's calling out the racism also doesn't understand it. Also doesn't know what he's saying. Also heard at home, don't speak about, racist. Don't speak in a racist manner. Neither one of them is actually coming from some sort of a decision that they've made or created themselves. They're just parroting something that they've heard from somebody else, correct? But really, and this is the interesting thing, when we talk about racism, on some level, we also don't know what we're talking about. We're told by people that it's hurtful and it's wrong, and then we're like, it's hurtful and it's wrong. Do we understand the hurt? Do we understand the wrong? I think actually, sometimes we as Jews, we do. We do get it, yeah. Bosses kind of suffered, just a bit. Actually, a lot more. It's not a race, it's not a contest, but you want to say, what do Jews know about suffering? Actually more than you. Actually more recent than you. You see what I'm saying? So we do know, we do understand it. But at the same time, although that answer bubbles up in us, we don't. Yes, we heard from. But did any of us live there? Yeah, okay. But how bad was it?
No, I went to a 5,000 people's school, and they were doing the changing, from where you live in one community, and they did integration. And I went to Jamaica, and they came into Forest Hills High School, and it was the Jewish kids and the white kids, maybe 5% of the school, and we were the minority, and it was very no white kid was on a sports team. Everything was geared towards
So you experienced reverse racism.
and then they would mother, so many things would go on, and we just learned to say, and then we were friends too, but they didn't do that. So yeah, I did get it. I'm not afraid.
So someone who actually lived in it has an ability to talk about what she has experienced. But for most of us, that's not the case. And interestingly enough as well, I want you to hear this because I don't mean to minimize your experience. They were not judging you by the color of your skin. What they were doing is getting you back. Reverse racism is not about judging white people by the color of their skin. This is my time. You held me down long enough. Now it's my turn. It's not a judgment call. And even when they say that white people are racists, many times they'll say it's not that they're bad, they just don't know, they just don't get it. It's very different than when white people were telling black people that they were inherently inferior. That's what was going on. They couldn't drink from the same water fountain. That didn't happen with you. And if it did, it was a getting you back thing, not a you are inherently racially deficient. By the way, we are starting actually to hear that today from black leaders, that white people are inferior to black people. We're not as good as them, as smart as them, as whatever, gifted, blessed, chosen, whatever you want to call it, okay? So it's important, this ability to be able to bring in, this multiplicity of voices, to hear things from different perspectives as best we can. Now, the smaller the decision is, the less important it is that you get it right. The bigger a decision is, the more voices you need to hear. When it's a huge decision, when I was moving here, I spoke it over with so many rabbis, with so many friends. And then I said to myself, my rabbis are not enough, and my friends are not enough. I need to speak to someone who moved from England to New York City, because they'll have something to say that my rabbis who are speaking from a perspective of spirituality, and my friends who are speaking to me from their sense of knowing us as a family, that they will not know. What can I go get from that person? So I was literally seeking out someone who had the ability to rule on this. So perhaps, unlike in the mashal, where a judge is bringing in haphazardly more people and just hoping that the other 2 or the other 12, or if it's a bet din, you could have a bet din of 23 or a bet din of even 71 like the Sanhedrin. If you're trying to make a good decision or trying to make a judgment call or trying to judge somebody, perhaps the most important person to sit or to bring in on your bench is someone that has experience that speaks directly to this case. I recently had a case where a couple came to me that they were struggling to have children, and they were trying to decide in between the different fertility treatments which way they should go. Now, there are some treatments that have different halachic basis and different halachic questions, and there are ones that are considered better to do and ones that are considered not as good. But every case needs a very specific question to be asked, because the particulars of the case actually make a difference to the way we would or the rabbis would advise a person like that. So in this case, what wound up happening was that this couple came and asked the question, what needs to be done, and I said to them, this is the preferred method, but the law says that b'di'evet, if a person is in a place of it's extremely difficult, okay, in a place of extreme difficulty, then they're allowed to rely on this, on a halachic leniency or loophole, okay? So the guy asked me what was a very good question. He says, well, how do we decide if it's an extreme difficulty? How do we know how to differentiate between something which we don't want, which is annoying, which is upsetting, which is a little bit more painful or a little bit more, more anxiety? How do we know if it classifies as extremely difficult? It's a good question, right? So I said to him, I can't help. But I said, but I have the number of a couple that did both procedures, and maybe if you talk it through with them, they could explain to you the experience, and then you can come back and ask the actual question, not what you think the question is. So that was an example of al tihidan yechidi, of me not judging by myself, but it was also an example of him not judging by himself and inviting someone onto his bench, if you will, that would have something of import to be able to help aid him in his final decision. So I think that is what this Mishnah is communicating to us, and it allows us also to be able to introduce a much more exacting mechanism for the decisions that we make. If you have a Sophie and a Walter on your shoulder, if you have a few of these, custom profiles that you've created, are you going to go crazy because you're talking to yourself? Maybe. Right? But I have found it to be an incredible, but literally I use this technique. I actually will ask them the question and and hear them respond. Listen to the way that they're actually talking about the topic. And what's fascinating to me is that within your own brain, that you'd think if they could come up with something novel, you could come up with something novel because their brain is your brain. The answer is yes, but your brain thinks about stuff from where you are. But the minute you cast your brain to the brain of a teenager or a young couple, you actually start to see things in their way, even using your own intellect. The process, therefore, of refinement that happens when you bring other people in on the conversation is one that should not and should never be undervalued. Okay, Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.